Right, well, good morning, everybody. It's now 9:30 and welcome to, I was going to say the final day or the final hearing session, but we do have one more day, which I'll come to later. And my name is Mike Fox. For those who don't yet know who I am, I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to assess the soundness of the Mid-Sussex site allocations development planning document. We'll take breaks at the normal times, although I'd imagine we'll be finished by lunchtime, but we'll have a mid-morning break anyway. We're on YouTube, so everybody be warned about that. And the final session today are going to be matter 7, looking at development management, uncertainties and risks. Then the council will close and then I will make a closing statement as well. And right, so let's start, unless Charlotte, you've got anything else you want to say.
No, nothing to add, nothing to add.
Nothing to add, in which case we will start and we'll look at matter 7, development management, uncertainties and risks. And 7.1 is concerned with development management, and it asks, does the plan provide sufficient guidance to cover all the relevant aspects of development management which are required to achieve the satisfactory implementation of the plan? The council's position is that they're satisfied that basically the document as submitted, together with any modifications that are put forward, and they've already got a document DPO2 with some of those in, that those together provide sufficient guidance to development management. They accept that some amendments have been made during consultation, which is quite normal, and in fact I would say positive to do that. The council state the primary role of the site's DPD is to allocate sites to meet residual housing and employment requirements. The policies within the plan will be considered alongside all the other policies within the development plan, which have been through their own examination procedures. Bolton Wilmore for Retirement Villages Development Limited, in answer to the question, does the plan provide sufficient guidance? They say no. And that to comply with the requirements of the adopted development plan and to be consistent with national policy, the plan must address the identified significant shortfall for leasehold extra care provision to secure the delivery of sustainable development and satisfactory implementation of the plan. They say a policy is proposed, and they've set this out in their statement, which outlines an identified need for 665 additional extra care units, use class 2, together with a set of what I would describe as locational and policy criteria. DMH Stallard for Welbeck Strategic Land, they are relying on their previous evidence in relation to matter 7. Turley for A2 Dominion state that the plan should avoid the unnecessary duplication of policies. Are there any points that any of the parties wish to enforce or focus on at this stage? Right. Oh, Lucy Wilford, do come in.
Good morning. Sorry, after a week or so, I couldn't find my raise my hand function. Good morning, I'm Lucy Wilford, I'm from Bolton Wilmore. I represent Retirement Villages. I obviously won't repeat what we said in previous sessions regarding the need. And I think we just succinctly summarised our points, and obviously we put a suggested policy forward to address the need which we think this plan must address. 2 points I quickly wanted to raise is I became aware last night, I believe we've been invited to take part or participate in a statement of common ground. having reviewed Friday's session. So I've contacted the council about how we may be able to contribute to that. The second point was, and it was left as homework, I suppose, for officers on one of the earlier sessions, notwithstanding the point that they feel it's not necessary to address the need for specialist accommodation through this plan. They also advised it wasn't possible. I don't think we've ever had an answer to that comment, which they said they would come back to us on. And related to that, I think we're interested in that answer, because if it's not possible now, how is it going to be possible to address it through the new local plan review? And whether this is just an issue of need that's going to keep rolling on and keep getting pushed from plan to plan rather than being addressed now as we think it should be.
I wonder if the council have got a response to that, to Lucy Wilford's question.
Morning, sir.
Morning, Andrew, Marsh.
Morning. Just in relation to the need element, I think, as we've said before, we relied on our evidence as part of our submission. Obviously, Ms Wilford was involved in the Albourne decision, which was the Albourne case, which was decided last September. And just the time elapsed since then, and obviously our submission and now has been relatively short. And that's why we've said that the evidence on C2 will be picked up as part of the plan review. Obviously, that's a very short time scale between that starting, or it has started, in fact, and this plan's adoption. So that's where we see it best to pick that up.
But about this point about it not being possible to actually change anything, can you be a bit more explicit about that?
I think, you know, the need evidence that we were relying on as part of the Albourne appeal gave us, pointed us in one direction as to what we should do with the sites DPD. Obviously, that decision came out in September. That was post or during our Regulation 19 consultation on this piece of work. And so the time elapsed between then and submission of this work. And of course, our other points we make in our topic paper about the suitability of the sites that have been put to us for C2 meant that we didn't change tack at that point. The district plan review is the appropriate mechanism for reviewing that, we feel.
Thank you. Maybe I could have Lucy Wilford back to respond to what you just said on that.
So if you look at the Barton Wilmore's draft statement, they talk about 665 additional extra care units. I mean, it's a policy which is directed at a very particular aspect of C2. I understand why it's put forward that way, but it is a very specific aspect. It's the aspect with which Barton Wilmore and their client in this case are particularly concerned. And I think one of the concerns the council would have is that if we're going to have something in whether it's the emerging district plan or if you told us to the site allocations document, it shouldn't just be specific to extra care. It needs to address C2 generally because there is a broader question of need. And that's why there would need to be a proper review of C2 needs, not one that was specifically focused on what retirement village developments do. And then also, so there is the question of sites. And as we've said to you previously, we've looked at sites that have been put forward specifically for C2 use. And we haven't refused those because we don't think it's appropriate to have C2 allocations in the site allocations DPD. We've refused those for other reasons relating to their impacts on various other sustainability considerations. So even if one were to get to the point of identifying a need, where does that take us unless we're then going to move on to identifying particular sites for meeting that need? Together with, if you put the things together, first of all, we've got to arrive at a clear conclusion as to what the need may be. And I appreciate Lucy Wilford will say, well, that was all decided by the Albourne inspector. For the reasons I've already indicated, I don't agree that that's the case. There needs to be a much wider ranging review. You've then got to go on and find sites, and that actually is quite a considerable exercise. It's one that cannot be done quickly, and it's why, in our view, it's better that it's done as part of the district plan. So you can look at the whole issue of C2 and have a much wider ranging call for sites. You can also look, in the event that there aren't enough specific sites for C2, smaller sites, if there are strategic allocations, we can look at building it into a requirement for an overall element of a strategic allocation, which is what council, for example, done at Inverhorn at the moment.
Lucy Wilford, what's your response to that? That it should in fact go into the district plan review, work of which has already started, I understand. Therefore, shortly you'll be able to have a much more comprehensive look at the whole C2 area. Would that not be the more appropriate way to go forward on this?
Well, I think our original point remains that the local plan has currently adopted mandates that this should have been considered as part of the site allocation process. This is something we raised in our Reg 18 reps and repeated in our Regulation 19. The fact the council hasn't done it and is trying to push it to a local plan review, I think is basically the nub of the issue. The fact that the local plan review is taking place, or revised, we'll see a draft this year. I understand there is a policy requirement to get a plan submitted within the next couple of years. But at the end of the day, the need remains. It should be addressed as part of this document. And just on the point of kind of housing site selection, again, we made comments in our representations that the selection process that they went through didn't specifically look for these sorts of developments. Our site was put forward, and the selection process didn't take into account the sustainability benefits of these sorts of uses in terms of the facilities they provide on site, and therefore don't make sites comparable to normal C3 residential developments. I think that was the main points to come back on that.
Right, thank you for that then. Thank you for the parties on that one. David Murray-Cox.
Good morning, sir. I'm here today for A2 Dominion, but you might recall that I and a colleague of mine spoke on behalf of Rainier Developments earlier in the examination sessions. He's not participating today, but he has been watching this and just messaged me and said, just to make the point that if you were to make any suggestion there should be a policy on the C2 angle, we would agree it should be broader than extra care, but we would be willing to work with all other parties, including Barton Moormore and their clients and the authority on the wording of that. That's all I've been asked to say at this stage, but I hope that's useful.
So you would want that to be something included within this plan, or work
for exactly the reasons that Mr. Burden spoke about earlier in the examination, and I did as well on behalf of Rainier. We do feel that there is a compelling need for it to be addressed in this plan. That was a matter set out in the district plan. The need exists, and it shouldn't be kicked down the road. So certainly in this site allocations document.
in which case I think it would be helpful. I've already asked for some work to be done between the parties looking at this. I think if you had a word with the council and added your name to the party, as it were,
yeah.
I think it'd be useful to get a combined response from yourselves and Barton Moormore and everybody else who's involved in this, as well as with the council.
I mean, so just to be clear about what it is you've asked us to do, this relates to Inverhorn and the existing reference in the plan to a C2 element at Inverhorn. And you'll recall the discussion we had as to whether that should be more specific. And there were two types of specificity that were discussed. One of them is greater clarification as to exactly what sort of C2 use it should be. And the second was greater clarification as to exactly how much C2 there should be at Inverhorn. And so what you said at the time was that I think accepting the comment that we'd made that it was unnecessary to tie the developer down to a particular type of C2 use. You said you thought it would be helpful to get some indication as to the quantum of C2 that would come forward, and that was the matter which at the moment we've understood you as asking us to take away to discuss with Imberhorn and to bring in. Well, I'm sure we're happy to bring in anybody else who has a stake in that discussion in terms of what it would be reasonable to require that site to bring forward. But just to be clear, that at the moment, as we understand it, that's the ambit of the work that we're doing in relation to Imberhorn. It doesn't at the moment go any further than that. If you wanted it further, we need you to tell us exactly what it is that you want.
Right, so the Imberhorn work, as we've agreed, especially in relation to the quantum, I'm interested in. But the policy suggestion that was put forward by Belton Wilmore, which now David Murray-Cox is talking about, is for the district in general, not just for that particular site. And what I'm saying is that that policy which was put forward by Belton Wilmore, I'd like comments on that, and then any changes to it that the parties would like to see. So it's two things. One is specifically tied to Imberhorn, and one is for the district in general, because the need is for the district in general as well. I hope I've made myself clear on that.
That's useful to us.
I don't know if Mr. Murray-Cox, did you have a response to that?
So I was going to make a point, but I think your conclusion then was exactly along the lines of what we would have said. There are examples of permissive policies, even where you don't get allocations in other local plans. For example, in the plan adopted by Hart District Council includes a policy setting out the circumstances where permission can be granted. So there are various ways in which this can be done, but we agree it's not just about Imberhorn, it's about the district as a whole. Thank you.
And have you seen, Mr. Murray-Cox, the suggested policy that Belton Wilmore have put forward?
Not as far as I'm aware, but as I said, we're very happy to engage with all other parties on that.
I would suggest that you look at that as part of this engagement, and I'll put this down as another action note, so it's hopefully crystal clear as to what I'm after. Thank you.
Right. What the council would find most helpful is if those parties who want a change to the local plan could get their heads together, and if it's, I mean, it may be that they want two different things and two different policies, in which case that's what they'll end up telling us. But if it's possible to come up with a single agreed policy that is their joint position, then we can consider that. If we think it's a good idea, we'll tell you so. If we think it's not, then it'll be a statement of uncommon ground which tells you why it's not. But I think, as you said the other day, in I can't remember who you're responding to, but you know, your inquiry notes specifically indicated that if people wanted changes, it would be helpful if they could set out what they wanted. Barton Wilmore have done that. If there's going to be a change to that to embrace any other sort of C2 element, it would be useful if we had a sort of joint statement from the parties who are advocating changes, and we'll address those. Thank you.
Just to make it absolutely clear, I think we're almost there, that we did say last week in relation to Imberhorn that I did want more clarification on whether it would be helpful to have the number quantum down. That's for one specific site, and I would like a response on Imberhorn as a standalone, if you like. Secondly, the work we're now talking about is district-wide, and it may be a permissive policy, for example. And as Mr. Brown has said, and I've said earlier, there is a start made on this by Barton Wilmore, and it would be useful, taking Mr. Brown's suggestion, that the parties get their heads together for that more general policy, and produce a joint statement. That would be really useful. As I say, I will put this down in a couple of notes, a couple of action points, or one action point for Imberhorn and a second action point for the general need and what that pertains to. Right, there's nothing. Right, Guy Flintoff, do come in. Who are you representing? I can't hear you. You've got your mic. You're muted.
Indeed. Apologies. Yes, Guy Flintoff. I'm
Right.
planning and design director at Retirement Villages. So I'm employed by the company. So Lucy Wilford is here representing us, and I've kept my counsel and relied on her to this point. But there was just one point of clarity that I would urge out of that last exchange. So I'm not quite sure whether Mr. Brown's suggestion that the parties excluding the council get together and put a note together to the council and the council passes judgment on it was quite the collaborative approach that you were encouraging. I rather read you as encouraging the parties, including the council, to get its heads together in a slightly more collaborative sense and see what might be agreed. But I don't want to put any words into your mouth, so I'll let you further advise on that.
Thank you for that. Obviously, collaboration is a good thing. I think what Mr. Brown was suggesting was, in the first instance, it would be helpful to the council if the parties could get together and if they could come forward with what they feel is a combined proposal of words, then they could then discuss and, to use your word, collaborate with the council and either come up with a statement of common ground or maybe uncommon ground. So maybe it's a two-stage thing. First of all, you get together with other groups, other parties, because a number of you, I know Turley and Barton Wilmore have been kind of trailblazers in this, but there's a number of parties that see this as being important. And that's why I'm concerned about it as well. So get together with the other groups first. When you feel you've got somewhere, it would be good then to contact the council. And I'll put this in my action note anyway.
Thank you.
Do you want to respond on that?
No, I absolutely agreed, and we'll put some, make sure we make some time in our diaries for a meeting with the council to discuss.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Any more comments on 7.1? Right, we'll move on to 7.2, which is uncertainties and risks. Overall, does the plan take sufficient account of uncertainties and risks? How flexible is it? The council state they're satisfied that the DPD, this plan, is sufficiently flexible to account for the uncertainties and risks that may arise during the plan period. They say there is a mix of size and types. There is an oversupply of 484 dwellings and 2.54 hectares of employment land above the minimum requirements. The council state that these figures provide the flexibility to ensure the housing and employment requirements that they are met in full, even if unexpected issues on deliverability arise during the plan period. The council go on to say they've worked closely with site promoters and developers to ensure that barriers to timely delivery of sites have been satisfactorily addressed. And then they say that through thorough and robust monitoring of the housing land supply, all these things together mean that the council considers that the site's DPD is a flexible and effective plan. Barton Wilmore for Retirement Villages developments disagree. They state there's an identified and significant need for specialist accommodation, especially extra care. That the new policy proposed, the one that I was referring to a few minutes ago, would address uncertainties, remedy the council's current strategy of leaving this matter for the next local plan review, and assist in addressing the failure of the plan to meet the soundness tests. And waiting for the local planning review only exacerbates issues of non-delivery and limits choice. They also warn, if warning is the right word to use, that this can impact negatively on health and well-being of residents and result in additional strains on the health service. Turley, for A2 Dominion, state that the LPA's evidence does not enable a conclusion to be made in accordance with NPPF 67, that the housing trajectory provides, quote, sufficient supply and mix of sites, taking into account their availability, suitability, and likely economic viability, end quote. The evidence base, Turley says, does not enable a conclusion, quoting NPPF 16, that the sites are deliverable, or NPPF 11, that the plan is sufficiently flexible to adapt to rapid change. Therefore, the plan is not then shown to be effective or positively prepared. Savills for Chartered House Strategic Land make quite a sizable contribution at this point. They state the plan does not take sufficient account of uncertainty and risks. It does not learn the lessons in allocation and delivery that can be learned from the current adopted district plan. The plan does not allocate enough units. When the development plan is considered as a whole, there is a 2% buffer. It's probably nearer 3%, but over the minimum housing delivery required, given the experience of delay and the knowledge that one of the strategic sites has already been identified, that it will not deliver 730 dwellings, talking about the Northern Arc, of course, there, in its planned period to 2031. It is prudent to heed this as a warning and allocate a sufficient number of dwellings so that the issues do not arise in future. Then the housing delivery test that the government now has shows that this district already fails to deliver a sufficient volume of houses. And this is in relation to a plan that 4 years ago was determined to be robust and sound. Therefore, Savills say, a greater buffer and a wider approach to distribution is required to overcome this. And also that the SADPD focuses 80% of its allocations in category 1 settlements with over 1,200 dwellings in just 4 sites. This unbalanced approach, they say, does not allow for sufficient flexibility to ensure housing delivery is maintained at the required level. And they finish by saying revisions are therefore required that better distribute dwellings across the district and across settlement categories. A greater number of dwellings also need to be planned for to allow for instances of delay or non-implementation. And they say, and this is not surprising, that some sites such as SA25 could therefore be expanded. Then Gladman Developments also make comments on this. They say that in its current form, the SADPD fails to take into account current uncertainties and risks concerned with the current oversupply of just, it's their word, 484 dwellings above the minimum requirements of 16,390 homes. This is far too low, and it would be more appropriate to plan for a greater contingency. They suggest between 10 and 20% additional. They say this is further compounded by the council's over-reliance on 4 strategic sites, which account for 35.4% of the district's housing requirements. And again, they refer me to the Northern Arc, where they say there's a particular difficulty in their minds, and that even the current trajectory for the Northern Arc envisages 200 to 300 dwellings per year from 2022-23. They then contrast this with the Lichfield's start to finish report, which suggests an average delivery rate on sites over 2,000 dwellings as 160 DPA. So they're saying you're going for 200 to 300 DPA. The actual acknowledged work on this subject nationally has the figure way down to 160 DPA. And they finish by saying the low contingency and over-reliance on strategic sites exposes the plan to a greater degree of uncertainty and risk. To remedy this, Gladman considers that the plan ought to allocate further non-strategic sites that could be delivered sooner to ensure a rolling 5-year housing land supply that could be maintained throughout the plan period. And finally, in terms of representations, Richard Barmby, and it's a slightly different tack. He draws my attention to the previous failed attempts, as he puts it, to deliver large-scale development in the Crawley Down, East Grinstead, Felbridge area. And of course, this includes SA19 and SA20 that we've debated at length. He says that nothing significant has changed since this last attempt of over a decade ago, and that the transport infrastructure problems, again of which we've heard a lot, could not be resolved then, and they've grown worse, as no significant traffic interventions have been delivered. Therefore, Richard Barmby argues, relying on sites SA19 and SA20 makes the their deliverability uncertain, and thus a plan wrelying on these sites is unsound. Those are the comments from the principal parties. I don't know if any of those parties who are here would wish to comment on what they've said and focus anything.
So before anybody else does, could I just sort of kick off for the council? That'd be all right.
Of course, you've been quite coy in the past.
Keep my powder dry, sir. Well, so
do come in, yeah.
The reason why I do it now, and I'm not going to say anything about C2. We've been around that house 3 times now, and you've helpfully indicated the way you want us to take that forward. But what I do want to pick up on is the suite of representations that came towards the back end of your summary about the overall position in relation to housing. And so the reason why I chip in now is to point out, and I know that some people will still be catching up with this because I think it only went on the website either on Friday evening or Monday morning, but the statements that you asked us to produce in relation to 5-year housing land supply and trajectory and so on have now gone in, and so they mean that there needs to be an update to the council's evidence as you summarised it in relation to matter 7, because it's absolutely true that at the start of this examination, based on as it were last year's results, we were coming in a world where the last housing delivery test we were at 91%, where the site allocations plan was making an oversupply of 484 dwellings. And so you will have seen, and I hope others have seen, even if they haven't yet had the chance to formally respond to, having now updated that position to reflect what's happened in the most recent year. The first thing to note, sir, is that in terms of housing completions, although, as you might recall, at the beginning of this inquiry, a number of participants were rather gloomily predicting that the council would be lucky to get anywhere near 800 completions this year. In fact, we are over 1,100 completions. I think the figure is 1,116. And therefore, although of course we still wait to see exactly what MHCLG does with those figures, as best we can tell, if you are going to look at a 3-year average for this year, we think this year the housing delivery test results should show Mid Sussex back at 106%. In other words, firmly back in the territory of an authority that is not just meeting the requirement, but exceeding it. So there is a consequence or corollary to the good year that we've had in terms of housing delivery, coupled with whatever else has been happening in terms of permissions over the last year. And that is that the residual requirement in the district plan has now been significantly reduced by a greater amount. And that means that the oversupply, which is planned for in the site allocations DPD, has gone up. We are no longer at an oversupply of 484 units. On our calculations, the oversupply would now be 973. And so that is quite important, because you will remember when we last discussed this in this examination, a number of participants who were saying the buffer wasn't great enough. Well, we're talking about what the buffer should be. Should it be applied against the whole of the 16,000 odd, or should it be required simply against what is left to come in the plan? And although it wasn't a universal position, there seemed to be general agreement that if you're looking at a buffer, it should be in relation to what is still to come. In other words, roughly 11,000 units over the remainder of the plan period. And if one took, again, I mean, a range of figures have been suggested, but a number of parties were suggesting to you the buffer should be 10% of that. Well, that would be a buffer then of 1,100 units. Well, so at 973, we're obviously not quite at 1,100, but we're getting pretty close to it. We're certainly a great deal closer than we were at 484. Now, the council's position throughout has been that you don't need to go to that 10% buffer, because we have already applied considerable caution in the expectations we placed on committed sites, recognizing that of the smaller, the non-strategic sites, 40% of those won't come forward. Those have already been discounted from the buffer that's there. And we've outlined our position in relation to trajectory. So we've always said we don't actually accept that you need to have a buffer. It's obviously a helpful thing to have, don't need to have it. But so to the extent that other parties disagree, we are now getting very close to the level of buffer which even they would have sought at 973 units. And so also in that regard, the adequacy of the supply depends in part upon how realistic the trajectory for the strategic sites is. And that also is a matter which you asked us to go away and update with statements of common ground from the developers of those sites. And so those have gone in. Again, people I hope will have seen them, even if they hadn't had a chance to go away and look at them in detail. And of course, so if they haven't, you've indicated that they've got 7 days to make representations. So if people can't respond today, they will still have the chance to let you know what they think about that. But so one of the things that in my submission comes out very, very strongly from those updated statements of common ground is just how strong the market is in Mid Sussex. And so simply to give you one example, Pease Pottage, the major allocation there, the next year is predicting that they will deliver 202 units a year. And so that figure of 200 or more was something which, as you've indicated in your summary, was criticised by a number of participants, for example, by reference to the Litchfield report, which suggests that is a high figure and higher than one would normally expect, even for a major strategic site. And so what you may have picked up from the statement of common ground with the Pease Pottage developer is that there is a very good reason why they have put the figure of 202 units in there. And there is very clear evidence that that is entirely realistic. Of that 202, they have already sold off plan without the building constructed, already sold 72 affordable units, and they have already sold off plan 50% of the market units. And in those circumstances, there is, I mean, it is plain as a pikestaff. They will build those elements. And in terms of what is left beyond that, bearing in mind the fact that they've achieved those sales off plan, there is every reason why they should be confident that they can achieve the overall target of 202. as we've said, Mid Sussex, it's an extremely strong market, and there is clear evidence to suggest that those sorts of levels are realistic and achievable. So that really is just trying to update what we've set out in our response by reference to the documents that you've asked for, and which simply update the position by reference to information that's come forward over the last year. But we say that it fully supports the conclusion that the answer to your question, does the plan take sufficient account of uncertainties and risks? The answer to that is yes, and that there is more than enough flexibility within it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for that erudite summary. It will help me, if you can get hold of this information, of just a signed letter from the developers at Pease Pottage with the figures that you said, because they are very impressive figures. And I think it would help me in my report if I had.
They're in the statement of common ground with the Pease Pottage.
In the statement of common ground, that's fine. I do apologise for.
No, I appreciate it, sir. People are still catching up. There's been a lot.
That includes me.
No, so it's one of the reasons why I thought it would be helpful to headline it now, because otherwise we could have a conversation that was based on what, as far as the council is concerned, is outdated material. And so if other people are in the same position as you and they're still coming to grips with this, then I mean, you have said that people should have, entirely rightly, 7 days to respond to those statements. People may wish to keep their powder dry this morning and just look at those statements in a little bit more detail and come back to you in writing on that. I'm not in any sense trying to foreclose oral comment today, but I'm just trying to make sure that people aren't saying something which, when they go away and look at the wider documents, they realise has been overtaken by events.
Thank you for that. And just for clarity, on all the action points, I will be accepting comments made up to 7 days afterwards from other parties. Clearly, I've asked for bits of factual information on a few things, and there's probably a limited amount of response that can be made. For example, over the social, the media outlets, that's just a black and white figure as far as I can see. But on other aspects, such as housing requirements, need, trajectories, etc., then there's every reason why I would encourage other parties to comment if they feel the figures in any way can be challenged. But thank you very much for that, Mr. Brown. That was extremely useful. Do I still have parties who wish to respond to that? Now is your chance. Well, it looks, Mr. Brown, as if you've impressed everybody. So we're getting nobody coming back on any of those. I spoke too quickly. That's prematurity for you. Guy Dixon from Savills, do come in.
Good morning, sir. Can I just check you can hear me correctly?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Guy Dixon from Savills, representing Charterhouse. Just a very simple question. When does the 7 days start in terms of comments back on this additional information, just for clarity, sir?
It's whenever the whenever the council's response to my request hits their hits the website. So, for example, I think I'm right in saying that the council's figures went on the website on, was it Tuesday morning? I think it was Tuesday morning, yesterday morning.
I thought it was Monday morning, sir, but
right, okay. I stand to be corrected about that. If it's Monday morning, then you've got until next Monday morning. Well, in fact, you've got until close of play on Monday. I'll be very generous. I'll give till the close of play, whatever day it is.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the clarification. That was all. Thank you.
That was all. Right. So it looks like, Mr. Brown, you have impressed the world with your comments. Getting nothing else in from people. We will go on in that case.
It takes me time to wait and see what it says. So, yeah.
David Murray Cox wants to come in. Mr. Murray Cox, floor is yours.
Sorry, I'm just trying to make the IT work. This end. It's just an really. I'm pretty sure that we all had an email from Charlotte the other day saying that we had until 5:30 on the 22nd to respond to the latest set of action points.
My understanding is, and Mr. Brown's confirmed it, that they went on this week. So
if people have been told they can have until 5:30 on Tuesday, I mean, the council is not going to quibble about an extra day. I mean, it's more important that people, have time to respond. And if you wanted to say 5:30 on Tuesday, I mean, it's a matter for you ultimately, but you know, as I said, from the council's perspective, a day is not going to make a great deal of difference.
I'm not going to spoil your reply for a ha'porth of tar, Mr. Murray Cox. So if you want until Tuesday, that will be fine.
Yeah, just
don't push me too far on this to get too many more days added on. But I will go to Tuesday.
Great. It was an email from Charlotte on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, which included that.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, do I have any comments on the substance of what Mr. Brown said? All I can do is reiterate that you have until Tuesday 5:30 to comment on it, if you wish me to take note of your comments. We will move on then to matter 7.3 on monitoring. Are the monitoring arrangements soundly based? And should biodiversity net gain be monitored? And the council are explaining in their statements that the monitoring schedule identifies the indicators, the target, the implementation, and the monitoring source, and this will result in an effective plan. And that they also state there's been a paucity of representations at both regulation 18 and 19 stages on monitoring. It's always been the Cinderella of the planning system. And I think that's quite sad in some ways, because good monitoring is essential for a good plan. Natural England recommended that biodiversity net gain should be monitored. This is reflected in policy SA Gen. They also refer me to the passage of the Environment Bill, which is anticipated to receive royal assent in autumn of this year. And the monitoring of this will be secured through the district plan review. I think I was slightly misleading the way I said that when I said that Natural England recommended. It's the council telling me that the Natural England recommended in relation to biodiversity net gain, and that the council are saying that once this is through into the Environment Act, then this will be secured through the district plan review. Sussex Wildlife Trust also make the point that biodiversity net gain should be monitored. Do I have any comment? Right, I've got Jess Price's hand has already gone up, so I'll take you now, Ms. Price.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I have read the council's response, and I do partially agree with it, and have sympathy with them that there are difficulties with monitoring net gain without the Environment Bill being enacted yet. And I'm pleased to see that they are talking about collecting information, you know, to inform the review and all of that. And in general, I think I support that. The only thing I would say is that biodiversity net gain, the requirement for net gain has been in the NPPF for quite some time before the Environment, you know, Bill was created. And obviously through policy SA Gen, there is a requirement for it. So it does seem a shame that they are going to wait to monitor that to see if that policy is being effective through the site allocations. So we would really encourage them, whether it's formally or informally, to at least do some monitoring, in particular because SA Gen requires the use of the biodiversity metric. That does make it a lot easier to monitor. At the very least, they could keep a record of the percentage gain that the site allocations are, you know, being approved with, you know, whether they actually create the percentage gain is a bit harder because that's over time, but at least you could keep a record of what the approval is, which I think would be extremely useful going into the local plan review in terms of setting future policies in terms of viability of percentage gains. You know, there's the environment bill we think is going to set a 10% minimum, but it is a minimum, and you know, people like the Sussex Wildlife Trust are seeing whether there might be scope for larger percentages, and some other local authorities have agreed that. So that kind of information about what percentages are actually being found viable by developers, I think would be really useful for the council going forward in creating new policies in their review. And the other thing we think would be extremely helpful is a record of if there's off-site net gain being agreed, because again, in the Environment Bill, there is going to be a requirement for a registry of off-site gain. And it would be really helpful if sites come forward before that those off-site sites are recognised and recorded somewhere, because we just don't want a situation that's happened in the past often with things like reptile translocation, where the sites kind of disappear into the ether and 5 years later you're not really sure what happened to them, or they get developed. And you know, we'd really like, net gain is meant to be in perpetuity / 30 years, so having some record of that from the council would be really helpful, I think. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Did David Murray Cox want to say anything more, or is your hand unintentionally up?
Sorry, sir, that's an unintentional hand.
Fine. Okay. So back to the council on this. Basically, biodiversity or net gain monitoring is something which you're obviously in agreement with. It's something already in the MPPF. Why not include it as from now and give yourself a head start for when you go into your local plan review? Mr. Marsh.
So obviously Appendix B sets out the monitoring framework related specifically to the site allocations DPD and the numerous allocations within it. We obviously publish our authority monitoring report. That's something we're obliged to do. That contains a whole range of indicators and monitoring points related to all the district plan policies. Will include any monitoring from the sites DPD and any other useful indicators that we can gather data on to help us not only monitor the effectiveness of the plan as adopted at the moment, but also to assist with our plan review work. So sort of not within the framework of the DPD, but to give some reassurance to Sussex Wildlife Trust that there are a range of issues that we monitor currently that are published in the AMR, and we will add indicators to that as necessary. It's not that we don't monitor it through the DPD work. It's not that we haven't monitored it already. It's that's the vehicle for us publishing the information on it.
It just seems at this stage, looking at the individual sites, it's where the rubber hits the road, if that's the right analogy to use in wildlife terms, but where it actually, the action happens. And I'm just wondering why you're reluctant when you already kind of cover this in your general SA Gen policy, why you're reluctant to actually go that one step further and actually put it in the DPD plan.
I don't think it's a reluctance, sir. I think we are covering it in other places. I think we're just highlighting in the monitoring framework specifically relates to SA1 all the way through to 38. The measurable aspects of each of those. I mean, there's nothing, as far as I can tell, that would stop us if we wanted us to make an amendment or to put anything in specifically on that in here. But I think just to give you some comfort that we are looking at a range of other indicators elsewhere in the AMR already.
And I mean, nobody's criticising you for not taking this seriously at a council-wide level. The point the Wildlife Trust are saying is that this will be an appropriate document for it to go in. Jess Price, is there anything you want to come back on this?
Yeah, only to say I would agree with you that I've seen the monitoring framework in the document, but there isn't anything really related to SA Gen. And I just think it would, as I said, really helpful would be those percentages related to the sites in the site allocation plan. That would be a really useful piece of information going forward. So if it could, whether I would agree, I think it could go in this plan, or if there's, you know, in the annual monitoring report, that would be okay as well. But it needs to, well, from my perspective, it would be great if it definitely did happen. So, you know, whether I think that probably means it needs to go in the plan, but I don't know.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to make a comment on monitoring? Okay. We'll go on to the final matter, which shouldn't take us too long. Matter 8. Are there any other soundness issues which this examination should cover? And 8.1. Do any additional soundness issues relevant to this plan arise from the NPPF? Council consider the plan to be sound as summarised in document TP3 and the legal compliance checklist, that this is a daughter document of the district plan, which is in general conformity with the NPPF. There are no additional soundness issues. Barton Wilmore make the point again that the plan should be addressing the issue of extra specialist accommodation. I'll take this with 8.2, I think. And 8.2 is, are there any other soundness issues with this examination should cover? And the council say there aren't any. And again, Barton Wilmore are making the same point about specialist accommodation. So begs the question why I put that question in the first place, I guess. So that's the end of my questions, end of my agenda. And I think the next thing down on the list is for any closing statements or comments that the council would wish to make at this stage.
Have a hand up from Mr. Rainier.
Oh, Mr. Rainier. Do come in.
Good morning, sir. Can you hear me?
Apologise. Yeah, I do apologise for missing you out.
That's all right. I think we had some discussion through Charlotte just on the topic of built up area boundaries. And you said that matter could be considered now. So I'm grateful for the opportunity just to have a few words, if I may, on that topic. I think it's common ground between the parties that built up area boundaries are a very important tool in planning. That they clearly define the area where development is normally going to be acceptable in policy terms, and that where the countryside policies appertain, and therefore development is broadly subject to various exceptions deemed to be unacceptable. And so in that regard, where you define the built up area boundary line is very important because of that fact. And to a degree, it's a subjective matter where it's a judgment as to where the character of an area changes from rural to urban, or semi-rural to semi-urban, or that sort of judgment has to take place. But it is important because having some flexibility and some sort of a generous built up area boundary helps with windfall opportunities, and therefore helps with supply. And it also helps, you'll be familiar with policy H6 of the district plan, I'm sure now, and there is within that policy an allowance for development to come forward on the edge, i.e. outside of the built-up area boundary, if it's contiguous, I think is the word, with the built-up area boundary, for small developments. And obviously the government is very positive about small housing allocations for small builders, not the larger schemes that much of this debate has been, or much of this inquiry has been talking about, but the smaller schemes that come forward. And in the district plan review, district plan inspector's report, when he considered this matter, it's paragraph 34, I think, of DPD 8 of the core document. He sort of put some reliance, and the council did, that certain number of units would come forward in that way. In reality, very few have come forward in that way, because there is also a policy requirement that it has to not impact on the character of the area to a detrimental, or in a detrimental way. And the local authority have refused quite a few schemes that have come forward, sort of promoting DP6 in terms of their scheme, but they've then refused the planning applications that have come forward. So I think the factor, or the important point I want to get across, is that these built-up area boundaries are important, and I've suggested in my representations a number of sites which should have been included in the built-up area boundary, in my view. The council, for their part, in their topic paper 2, have come back and said largely they don't agree with those proposals that are being put forward. But I would ask you, sir, I mean, it's probably not a matter that you will want to have a debate where the council just say, no, we don't, we stick to our guns and I stick to my guns, and it's rather futile sort of propose, I think it should be in the built-up area, they think it shouldn't be. But nonetheless, I would ask you, sir, to have a look at those sites and some of the justifications for why they should not be included in the built-up area boundary. The sites at Burgess Hill, close to SA12, I'm sure close to your heart at the moment, sites in Skeins Hill, SA31, adjacent to an allocation where there's an existing ribbon of development there. There are other sites in Cookfield that I've mentioned where the council seem to be saying that because the site is well screened, although it's got quite a lot of development on it, that means it changes the character of the area and shouldn't be included in the built-up area. So I just wanted to put those points to you in this forum. I know you have them in writing, but I'd be grateful if you could take a close look at those, sir, and make your comments impartially as part of your report.
Thank you for that. Do I have any response from the council?
So yes, and I mean this is in the nicest possible way if I say that, in essence, what Mr. Rainier is asking you to do is to find a backdoor way around your starting point, which is that you will not be looking at omission sites unless you're satisfied that we haven't met. Because what in essence he's doing, he's asking you to review the council's approach to built-up urban area boundaries, but to do that by reference to the particular sites that he thinks should be included within that boundary. And that in essence is saying you should have allocated those sites. In reality, so you can't approach it that way. You've either got to say the council's approach to built-up area boundaries everywhere is wrong, and we should be much looser and allow a wider range of things to come in. Even though we're not allocating the land, we create the possibility of windfall development that is there. And so you will know that given the environmental constraints around Mid-Sussex, I mean, that could have some really quite wide-ranging implications. And even Mr. Rainier, to be fair, doesn't go so far as to say that for every settlement we should be relaxing our built-up area boundaries. In actual fact, what he's asking you to do is to relax it to include his particular sites. And that is really asking you to allocate his sites. And that falls within your general principle on not looking at omission sites unless you conclude that we haven't actually met the need sufficiently. So I think that's the council's short answer, sir.
Mr. Brown has taken the words out of my mouth. When I put together my guidance note, I did make it clear in there that my task here is to look at what the council's put before me, which in their view is a sound plan, and it's for me to, as it were, subject that to a degree of rigour and see whether in fact I consider it is a sound plan. And it's only if I come to the view, having looked at the council's housing provision, that I feel it is lacking in terms of numbers, that I would then in a stage 2 of this examination process and open it up to the kind of issues that Mr. Rainier is pointing me towards. So that's where I stand on that one. Your hand is still up, Mr. Rainier. Do you want to come back on anything?
Yeah, can I just come back briefly, just once? Firstly, I appreciate what Mr. Brown has said and you've said, but truthfully, sir, that they are not the reasons why I put forward this site. I'm not paid or looking at those particular sites in terms of their allocation for development. I have other sites on the edge of built-up area boundaries where I've made representations, and I think should be omission sites that should come forward. But largely that is not the case in this particular instance. What I've tried to draw out is what I consider to be a number of anomalies in the council's approach, which is that they are being too strict in terms of the built-up area boundaries, and they should be some relaxation in particular cases for specific reasons. And the council have responded to that by saying, well, no, we're not going to change those various sites. But I don't think they've got any justification for doing so. They've also said that in their topic paper that they will undertake a full-scale review at the district plan stage, the review stage. But of course, as others have said, even earlier this morning, that last review of the built-up area boundaries took place in 2002. It's nearly 20 years ago, and there have been some reviews since at neighbourhood plan stage, and there's some acceptance at this stage that they will increase, that they will add additional built-up area boundaries where there are allocations. But I do think that there should be, just in specific areas, that this is unsound, because those sites that should be allocated, or should be not allocated, but should be included within the built-up area, are not included within the built-up area. In some cases, they're sites which can't take any more development because they're already well developed already. And it's not because I've got any ulterior motive in the majority of those cases. Thank you.
I'll give the council a chance if they want it to respond on that as to whether in fact this is
I think that the short answer, and it goes back to the fact this is a site allocations DPD. It's not the purpose of this document to conduct a borough-wide review of the built-up boundaries. So the only changes that we've made in the SADPD to the built-up boundary are either to reflect new development that has taken place since the last time the boundary was drawn, and that's just to reflect the factual reality on the ground. That's an updating exercise, not a policy change, or where there needs to be a change in order to reflect allocations in the site allocations DPD. In other words, to the extent that there is any policy element involved, it's inextricably bound up with the fact that this is a document that is making allocations. The council hasn't considered it the role of this document to go beyond that and do a borough-wide review of the built-up urban area boundary.
Thank you. So if nobody else wants to make a contribution, and we come to the final parts of the hearing sessions. First of all, if the council wish to do this, a closing statement from them, and then secondly, a closing statement from me. So I'll give the council the first call on this one if they wish to provide me with a closing statement.
So we've got, it comes in two parts, and I think the first part is Councillor Edwards wished to say a few words, and after that I was going, or is it the other way? Yes, I'm told that.
It's the other way around, I think.
Is it? Oh, right, okay, I've been told I should go first, so I'll do that if I may. And Councillor Edwards can come up, tag on behind. So the backdrop to this examination, as you know, has been the commitment that was made in the district plan to allocate further sites, both strategic and non-strategic, in order to meet the remaining housing requirement over the period. And the SADPD shows how the council proposes to meet that commitment, notwithstanding the challenges of doing so in a district which is 50% AONB, where some of the most sustainable settlements lie within the setting of the South Downs National Park, and where, so as you've heard over the last 2 weeks, some of the transport infrastructure issues are complex. But the council is committed to ensuring resilience, and as you've seen, the allocations document includes a degree of over-allocation for both housing and employment to ensure that the council's strategy remains robust throughout the plan period. So at the beginning of this examination, we noted the council's historic good record in maintaining a 5-year housing land supply and in relation to delivery. On day 2, a number of parties questioned whether we would be able to maintain that claim once the housing figures were updated to reflect the position at the end of the year just gone. And they argued that the buffer which the Allocations DPD provides is not enough. But sir, as I've already canvassed in response to matter 7 this morning, our latest statements on the 5-year housing land supply and trajectory, which were submitted at the beginning of this week, show, notwithstanding the pandemic and what most people would regard as an extraordinarily difficult year, show that completions were in excess of 1,100, a figure well above the 800, which some participants were gloomily predicting. And the result of that, sir, is that the housing delivery test results for this year, although we don't yet have the formal results, the council confidently expects that those will show a 3-year average of 106%. So as I indicated earlier today, those completions also mean that we've made significant inroads into the residual requirement from the district plan. That's now been reduced overall to 797 units. And so that means that the buffer of 494 units, which we came into this examination believing that we had, so that has now increased to a buffer of 937, or is it 73? It's 937 units, and so consequently, even if you were to conclude that some of the SADPD allocations were not sound or that they should be reduced in scale, we say that there would be no need to require additional sites. There's a buffer there which is capable of absorbing that. In terms of the 5-year housing land supply, sir, we're not asking you to certify that through this process, but we nonetheless recognise it's an issue that you will look at under the umbrella of soundness. As you know, we've taken a cautious approach to the delivery of small sites, discounting by 40% those which have permission and might otherwise be expected to come forward. And that's based on sound historic data as to what happens with sites of that kind. Questions which have been raised by participants in relation to the expected trajectory of the larger strategic sites. So we've addressed those through the updated statements of common ground with the developers of those sites. And this morning I referred you, just by way of example, to what's happening at Pease Pottage, where already there are very significant off-plan sales, which indicate that the sorts of targets that you see in those statements of common ground with council's trajectory are entirely achievable. So what those documents, the completions last year, what the statements of common ground all demonstrate is that there is both market demand and confidence in Mid Sussex, which makes the council's figures entirely realistic in our submission. It demonstrates that even in a time of pandemic, this council working in close partnership with developers, has secured excellent delivery rates. And so in terms of what is yet to come, you've already heard, for example, that should Imberhorn, should the Science and Technology Park be allocated, there are already draft planning performance agreements in place to progress delivery of those sites at pace. Mid Sussex, there is emphatically not an authority which persistently and continually underperforms, indeed to the contrary. So we are conscious that there are many people who consider that the allocations document should be going further than it currently does, with calls both for it to meet the needs of adjoining areas which have been identified since the district plan, and for it to include policies on matters such as climate change, biodiversity, where government policy and indeed legislation has changed and is still in the process of changing. So the council's position is that in the main, those are not matters which are appropriate for the site allocations as a daughter document to deal with. The council intends that those should be addressed through the review of the district plan. It's not that we are averse to dealing with those, it's a question of where is the right place to do it. And so you know we've already commenced the preparation of the new district plan in line with policy DP4, which required the commencement of that work in 2021. That work has commenced in line with that commitment. A call for sites has been undertaken. Additional evidence on housing, including specific evidence on gypsy and traveller and C2 needs, employment and retail needs, that work has also been commissioned. And so the intention is that there will be a Regulation 18 consultation this autumn, and in line with the local development scheme, the new district plan will be submitted to the inspectorate in 2023. In those circumstances, so while we look forward to and will of course give full consideration to your findings and reporting, we hope that the site allocations DPD can be adopted as soon as practically possible and that delivery pursuant to it can commence. We remain satisfied that the allocations DPD has been robustly prepared in accordance with the requirements of the NPPF and planning practice guidance and indeed best practice. Of course, sir, if you disagree with us in any respect, you will propose main modifications. We've specifically asked you to do that. One of the things that I should emphasise is that this is an authority that believes firmly in the plan-led system. It very much wants to have an up-to-date local plan and one which is sound. And so, notwithstanding the wide-ranging debate and disagreement over the last 2 weeks, we fully understand that this process, examination, the ability of third parties to bring a different perspective and your consideration of those arguments, that those things are fundamental to the plan-led system and to ensuring that plans are robust. Whether you agree with us or whether you agree with objectors and recommend changes, we are fully confident that the result of this process will be a better and more robust plan, a plan that is fully sound and provides a firm platform from which to take forward the district plan review. And so in that context, we are grateful to you and to all the participants for their involvement in these proceedings. And so at that point, I think I pass over to the councillor just to have a last few words. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. And thank you for the opportunity as leader of the council to make some closing remarks on behalf of the council. And if I could just begin by thanking you, sir, for the thorough and generous approach you've taken to this examination, ensuring all have had an opportunity to contribute. And as Mr. Brown has just said, the council recognises the value of the inspection in the plan making process to ensure that we have the strongest plan possible. I'd like to thank all of the participants and especially town and parish councils and local residents who have taken the time to be involved, and to particularly thank the council's team, including Paul Brown and Chris Tunnell, for all of their work and efforts. Before I just get on to my main comments, I'd also just like to briefly recognise the commitment of Andrew McNaughton, the Cabinet Member for Planning, when this DPD was prepared, who sadly passed away recently. Andrew was our most experienced planning councillor who had a particular passion for ensuring the delivery of new homes, especially affordable homes, and the importance of local plans. And I know his commitment to Mid Sussex and the legacy he leaves will not be forgotten. So plan making is never easy in communities such as Mid Sussex. At every stage, we are trying to balance making provision for the large numbers of people who want to live in Mid Sussex with protecting the reasons why people want to live here in the first place. A fantastic environment amongst the national park, an area of outstanding natural beauty, towns and villages with character, and an expectation of a less urban lifestyle than some other communities in the London to Brighton corridor in which we reside. And it is essential that we always try and strike that balance for the benefit of existing and future residents. But given the demand for housing and the requirements set by the government, the council understands the benefits of a plan-led system to support the delivery and management of sustainable growth. Despite all of the challenges the plan-making process provides, it is clearly in the interests of local communities to have a plan rather than the ad hoc, speculative, unplanned development that can be achieved on appeal without a plan. So we're committed to having an up-to-date plan and maintaining a 5-year land supply. And doing so is really important to help the council secure the necessary infrastructure and community benefits to help mitigate the impact of growth. So when the district plan was produced, the council set the objective of delivering balanced and sustainable growth that improves sustainability and sought well-located and well-designed developments, reflecting the distinctive and special towns and villages in our district, meeting local and wider housing needs whilst protecting our landscapes and our character and our community identity. As you would have seen, hopefully over the last few weeks, the council has prepared the DPD in line with the strategy established in the district plan. We have not shirked difficult decisions and are proposing, as Mr. Brown has again highlighted this morning, a significant buffer to ensure housing delivery can be assured. Our approach also reflects the importance of balanced sustainable growth, particularly balancing housing, which tends to obviously attract the most attention, but also employment spaces, and ensuring that there is sufficient employment land across the district to support economic growth. As you'll have seen, we're supporting a sub-regional science and technology park, which is of particular importance to us in ensuring the significant growth in the south of the district can be provided alongside more jobs, more skilled opportunities locally, and helping support a rapid economic recovery from the pandemic. While the council are not landowners who bring land forward or developers who are ultimately responsible for building the homes being discussed, we do understand the importance of the council's role and do not seek to avoid our part in the system. It's important that everyone plays their part in ensuring housing delivery takes place once plans are in place. The council has brought forward this DPD to complete the current district plan, and work on the district plan review is underway to plan for the future. And you can take comfort, sir, that the council is committed to meeting its obligations to ensure we continue to have up-to-date, fit-for-purpose plans and a strong housing land supply. And throughout, the council wishes to ensure that new homes are delivered by the market in a timely manner with good quality design, maximum infrastructure provision, and the creation of sustainable communities in which people will want to live for the long term. Thank you again, sir, for allowing me to speak, and the council looks forward to your conclusions in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your words, sir, and also to Paul Brown for his closing words. Right, I just want to say a few things about the next steps and then one or two other matters. I shouldn't take too long. I think to start with, just like to say that I clearly need time to digest both the responses to the action points and any responses which may come in from other parties. And we've had the dates by which those are requested discussed or expected discussed. Because I haven't yet received, of course, all the responses even from the council. And as you know, I've asked the other parties to reply within a week. I've also got a few further site visits, which should help me gain even greater understanding of some of the things that have been said within this virtual chamber, if that's the right way of describing what Zoom is. Also, we've got the issue, a big issue of the relationship between the sites allocations SA12 and 13 and the setting of the national park. And following the site visits that I'm undertaking on Thursday and the subsequent documents that I'm expecting either jointly or separately from the national park and the council, I will hold a final session. And again, I will set questions for that final session, like a set of mini MIQs for that. And that will help me enormously in what's a very important area for this council. So once I have all this information, I'll be able to consider what main modifications, if any, I will suggest to the council. I have a small number of sounders concerns, which I obviously aim to consider carefully in the light of the action notes and the responses from other parties. For example, though this is not an exhaustive list, and I shouldn't be tied down to this, I need to consider carefully what the parties are saying on issues such as, and that there's 5 things really. First of these is whether the council can maintain a rolling 5-year housing supply. Is the provision flexible enough to do this? That's my first issue that I need to get to grips with, and thank you for the information that's already come in to help me on that. My second major consideration is to satisfy myself that none of the sites in the High Weald AONB can be classified as major development. Again, we've had a lot of debate on this. I've been to the sites unaccompanied, but I aim to go back and look at a couple of these sites on an accompanied basis. That's my second area, if you like. My third issue is, should the plan be making additional care home provision? And again, we've discussed this morning about not only Imberhorn, which is the one example within the site allocations where mention is made of this, but also the general point over the district as a whole. I need to look at that carefully. And again, I'll be interested in the work that comes in from the providers on that and the council's response. My fourth point, which I've touched on already, is the setting of the national park. I have to satisfy myself that the setting of the national park is not going to be compromised by any of the proposed developments in the south of the district. And a final point, a lot of debate on this yesterday, on the complex transport picture that we have in mid Sussex. It was alluded to, I notice, in Paul Brown's closing submission, and I have to satisfy myself that the impact of some of the larger allocations, whether or not they are severe, and then even if they are classified as severe, I then have to do a kind of balance, if you like, with the other sustainability benefits and maybe disbenefits in relation to impacts, and come up with what I consider to be either sustainable or not, and whether there are needs made to the plan, need to be made to the plan as a result. So my next task is to consider carefully all the evidence that I have read and listened to over the past few months, and especially the last 3 weeks. And of course, the response from the action points and other parties, as I've mentioned. And you will be hearing from me in due course on this. I will probably write a letter. I did indicate this right at the outset, but I will probably write a letter letting everybody know the outcome of my deliberations. And it would include, for example, whether I feel there are any main modifications that are needed. It will also set out a timetable for any future work if required, and the overall timetable for progressing this plan through to ultimate adoption or the parts that I can play in it as an inspector. So at the moment, just because of the sheer pressure over the last few weeks, that I'm not quite at a stage when I can set out exactly what I'm going to put in that report. Just turning to other aspects, it's been a very interesting examination for me. You live in a very beautiful part of the world. It's been a pleasure to come down and look at parts of mid-Sussex, as well as a pleasure to meet so many people. My only regret really is that I can't meet you face to face within a physical context. I do find Zoom quite restricting in many ways in terms of reading body language and just feeling the temperature of the room, if you like. And I quite like to have that kind of experience. But I want to thank you all, despite the restrictions that we're under, necessarily under, I'm not criticizing them. Just thank you all for conducting yourselves in an open, frank and courteous way. It's made my job a lot easier, and I want to thank you all for that. I know you have passions that run highly, sometimes in different directions, but you've all deferred to each other to speak, and hopefully that's helped everyone. I want to thank the council's planning team and legal counsel for working hard and conscientiously, responding to my requests, which have not been few, and that work's been done thoroughly, professionally, and conscientiously. And again, I want to thank the council for that, and for all the other parties as well that have taken part in this examination. I think it's been held in a good spirit, and that's been to the benefit of all. I'm not the greatest fan or user of IT. That may be obvious on occasions. I do struggle, and therefore I do want to thank the IT team for making this whole thing happen so smoothly. I must admit, when we went on to Teams and Zoom, and I've now done 3 examinations this way, or I'm doing 3 examinations this way, I felt my end had come initially, and I've been very reliant on a number of incredibly dedicated people who've made the IT work. So I want to thank all the people in the back rooms who I don't see for making this thing happen so smoothly. So thanks to you. And then I wish to thank Charlotte, who's been an absolutely amazing programme officer, a joy to work with. And I don't always say that about programme officers, but I do in Charlotte's case. And I felt we've been a team. Whether she feels this is another matter, but I certainly have felt that we work well as a team. I just want to thank formally Charlotte for all her work. And my final comment is a reminder to everybody that the examination isn't closed. It doesn't close until the council has my final report. And hopefully, after my deliberations and a letter, we'll at least be on track to knowing roughly when that's going to happen. So again, thank you for everything. That's all I need to say. And I will now close this section of the examination. We will, of course, be having 1 extra day to talk about the national park, and hopefully we can have that as soon as possible. But on that note, I will now say thank you and goodbye.